Hello, everyone. I'm Lila Riccozzi, host of This Week in Texas History, a weekly show that is part of the Save Texas History program. Save Texas History is brought to you by Commissioner George P. Bush and the Texas General Land Office. If you love our state's history and want to make sure that it lasts forever, please visit savetexashistory.org, and we encourage you to make a tax-deductible donation.
Today we have three wonderful guests. Dr. Ellen Riojas Clark is Professor Emerita in the Division of Bicultural Bilingual Studies at the University of Texas at San Antonio. In her long career, she has published several scholarly papers and books, including the brilliantly titled Tamales, Comadres, and the Meaning of Civilization. Among other honors, Clark was given the La Prensa Outstanding Women in Action Award and is an inductee into the San Antonio's Women's Hall of Fame. She was recently honored by Voices de la Luna, Bexar County's only independent literary magazine, for her contributions to the literary and cultural life of San Antonio. Dr. Jennifer Speed is a research development strategist in the Office of the Dean for Research at Princeton University. Previously, she was research professor of religious studies at the University of Dayton, where she specialized in Spanish historical writing and narratives, biography, theology, law, and in her own words, troublesome women. A Fulbright scholar, she holds a doctorate in medieval history from Fordham University and has served as co-director of 2 National Endowment for the Humanities grants. Kathy Sosa is a nationally awarded marketing and political design consultant and the co-founder of Sosa Consultation and Design. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees in political science from St. Mary's University, and along with her husband, Lionel Sosa, created and produced the critically acclaimed documentary, Children of the Revolution, How the Mexican Revolution Changed America's Destiny. Sosa is also an acclaimed artist whose work has been shown in galleries and exhibit spaces across the country, including the Mexican Cultural Institute in Washington, D.C. Her art draws inspiration from the blended culture of the Texas-Mexico border and is noted for its powerful depictions of women. All three of my guests are the editors of an anthology of essays titled Revolutionary Women of Texas and Mexico, Portraits of Soldaderas, Saints, and Subversives, which was recently published by Maverick Books, a Trinity University press in print. Notably, it features a foreword by famed civil rights activists Dolores Huerta, as well as 18 illustrated profiles of historically significant women from the Texas-Mexico borderlands. Kathy, I'd like to start with you. In the book, you write that this work was inspired in 2009 by an essay you read in the run-up to the centennial of the Mexican Revolution. Can you speak a bit more about how the idea for this book first took shape? How did your co-editors come on board, and in what way did this collaborative approach influence the book?
Okay, so the essay that I was handed in 2009 made the case of the importance of the Mexican Revolution to Texas and America, that it drove upwards of 1 million people north, and that wave of people would change the face and the future of Texas and the country. And I was surprised that I didn't know that. I was surprised that that could be a fact and I wouldn't know it, and that my husband wouldn't know it either, because he spent his whole career in the Latino marketing arena. And so, and also he had told me a couple of stories about his grandmothers. Both his grandmothers had come to Texas from Mexico during the Revolution, neither one with a husband or a man, both with little kids to bring along, walking through a war-torn country, finding your way to the train, getting on the train, getting down in San Antonio and starting over from zero, albeit in a place where there were some friendly people who spoke your language. But we had never put those two stories together as more than coincidence, you know, and surely didn't think of these two women as part of a huge group of women who made such a difference that their stories would need to be told as a group. So anyway, we doubted it a little bit because we didn't know it, and having egos, we set up at a popular restaurant where all our friends went, most of our friends of Mexican American descent, in business and politics, and would have breakfast there and make decisions. Made them sit down for a second and said, "Did you have an ancestor who came to San Antonio during the Mexican Revolution?" And every single one of them said yes, without exception. Not only did they say yes, but they had the evidence of the stories. They had the ephemera, they had the documents, they had photographs, they had postcards in the proverbial shoebox under the bed or in the closet. And so once we had gone through that, we really felt like we were onto something, that we were looking at a big chasm in Texas history and stories that need to be told. And we said, wow, this could be a documentary series. Wow, this could be a coffee table book. Wow, this could be a book about the women. It gives a name and a story to this group of women who changed our world. And so one at a time, we did these things. And this book is the culmination of that, really. It's taken 10 years to do. And that's how it began. Once we decided we needed to do these things, and my special purpose was the book about the women, then I asked Ellen and Sandra Cisneros to get together with me and propose the book and say, is this a good idea? Does this hold water? Does this make sense? Could this be a book? And they both said, yes, definitely it could. Sandra said she would be a contributor to the project. And then I went to Jennifer, who is a family friend and a PhD in history, and proposed that Ellen and Jennifer and I co-edit the project. And luckily, all three said yes. And the way the group influenced the outcome of the book is, I had no idea what the book was going to look like when I asked Ellen and Sandra to come to coffee. Who would be, outside of the Soldaderas, who are, sort of in our collective awareness during this period, who are the individual women that we should talk about and highlight among the various ones that were possible. And Ellen and Jennifer and Sandra would weigh in too, but mostly Ellen and Jennifer said, well, here's a long list, and here are the people who are passionate about them and who have a deep and profound understanding and who write about them and so forth. So that's what happened.
I've got two questions related to the title of your book. My first one is, in the book, Norma Elia Cantu says that none of the profiled women set out to be revolutionary and yet nevertheless were. Jennifer, you also address head-on the issues related to using terms like revolution and revolutionary. Why was it important to you for this book to look at these women through that lens?
When we think of world-changing events, revolutions, we think of warfare, we think of regime change. And the people who are most active in those, because of the vicissitudes of history, habits, and culture, are often men. So if that's your idea of revolution and something that changes the world, changes society, is only defined in terms of male leadership, then you leave out all the people who radically change society and culture in other ways. And so we didn't make anything up, but we expanded the term of revolution as, creating culture anew, changing the world. And we looked at people who changed the world, changed culture in large and small ways, not through power, not through governmental change, not by leading an army, but in all of these other ways, within their own spheres of influence, they were able to be revolutionaries and to be revolutionary. And when you open up the definition and you expand what that kind of change means, it leaves room for a lot more people to take part. And so we wanted to tell the stories and call out those women who really were revolutionary.
So the narrower focus of the book, to quote the title, is Soldaderas, Saints, and Subversives. Other than some great alliteration, what drew you to telling the stories of these particular categories of women?
I think that traditionally women have been viewed or defined through very, very narrow roles, maybe saints or virgins and housekeepers and mothers, always from a maternal point of view. is my opinion. Without, I think the point that Jennifer just made of broadening the definition of revolutionary, what does revolution mean, is really the point. And we just expanded that so that mothers or the maternal figure is going to fight for her family, fight for the well-being, fight for the future. And that is very revolutionary. The mere fact that they teach the culture and the history to their children and to oncoming generations is of great importance. So do they do it in an overt way? Maybe not. Maybe it's not overtly done, but it's there through action. And I think that that's what we found was most important of these women, was that action was always what they did. Maybe not planned. It was, maybe some of it was reactionary, but it was reactionary to the context in which they lived and in which we're living now. So the women, historical women we looked at, the contemporary women that have looked at, have always been responders to issues, and they have fought for those issues, for the well-being of their families and of their children and for future generations.
I'd like to ask you about the organization or structure of the book. The book's essays are organized into 3 distinct groups in perhaps an unusual way. The first section is Women of the Mexican Revolution, beginning in 1910. The next section is women from the pre-revolutionary era. And then finally at the end, the women who come after the revolution. What made you structure it this way?
So the core or the heart of the book is the women from the Mexican Revolutionary period. But then we said, well, we need to ask ourselves who inspired them. Who were their antepasados, who gave them the understanding that they could do something big and important, that they could undermine the power and authority of an established system. And that's why we decided to go back. And then we said, and who represent the legacy of who did they inspire? So who were the women that they were inspirational to, who did big, important, world-changing things after the revolution?
Jennifer and Ellen, both of you profiled 2 women for this book, Maria Concepcion Acevedo de la Llata and Gloria Anzaldúa, respectively. What made you each gravitate to your subjects and want to personally tell those stories?
In the case of Maria Concepcion, or Madre Conchita, I think her story is compelling. She was a cloistered nun who ends up being accused in a plot to assassinate the president. That's soap opera material. That's drama. I mean, it upended Mexico's political system. I mean, the whole story is just fantastical. But me, as a historian, I've always been interested in how people tell their stories, especially in the distant past. Now, we live in a world of tell-all books. Everybody writes, either they ghostwrite or they do themselves, whether it's, celebrities, chefs, politicians. It's really common for people to write tell-all stories that are autobiographical. For a woman to compose her own autobiography, beginning in the 1930s, is really radical. And she did it because she realized that other people were not going to tell her story, and they weren't going to tell it truthfully. The only person who could do that was herself. And what's more than that is she actually did it in multiple formats. So it began as a series of letters that she wrote that she worked with her attorney after she was put into jail. And then she began to become more formal. And then she wrote a more informal version of it. So she actually has 4 versions of her autobiography. I was able to get a hold of them, 3 versions of it for this essay, and I'm still trying to get my hands on the 4th one that was published as a serial. So again, just her story, but then claiming her own story as to be the one to tell it. She wasn't trying to prove that she was innocent. I think everyone agrees now that she was. It had nothing to do with her innocence. It had to do with truth and authenticity. And for her, that's where justice was. It had nothing to do with the court system. Telling her story was. And so I'm still just completely enamored of her story. And I think there's more to tell about her. doing that. So that was my perspective on. I was just thrilled to be able to write about her.
I think for me that Gloria Saldúa has done much of the same in terms of my own personal development as an academic, and a very contemporary woman, a Southwest Texas woman who developed theory. And it's very unusual to find theorists that are female, much less Latinas, queer, etc. And I think that's what she has done in a very, very critical way, introducing and developing the concept of borderland theories, which for people who live in that context, maneuver themselves on a daily basis. And those of us who live on the borderlands between the United States and our heritage land of Mexico undergo that all of the time. So never having read anything like this before, never even hearing about what is a mestizo theory, not ever talking about feminists and the point of view of mestizas or people of color was a very, very new thing. It was definitely world shaking for me and for many other academics. And I think that what she did for me was to firmly grab hold of my consciousness and help me to understand what and why is what I look into in terms of the contextual beings for me and people of color. And I think that's the understanding that she has given with her insights. I consider her a philosopher, just like Sor Juana de la Cruz. I consider her to be a valiente, a very, very valiant woman who crushed through all of these other aspects in terms of what had been developed or conceptualized by mostly white males, and to form a place for those of us who never felt to be part of this understanding of what it means to be part of the United States and part of Mexico, to be of the Americas. So when we say America, we tend to think that's the United States. Well, the Americas, it's much, much larger than that. And so this daily crossing back and forth does something not only to our cognition, but to our being of self. And I think that she has achieved that by making a place for her concepts, for us to look at the world in that way and to interpret and analyze it from that. So how much more a revolutionary person can someone be than Gloria Saldúa?
In addition to co-editing the book, you also contributed pen and ink illustrations of the profiled women and the amazing cover artwork. What was that creative process like? Did you find that your art was influenced by the essays, or did you consciously try to avoid doing that?
Well, my husband Lyle and I, we collaborated on the pen and ink drawings. Here's one, one for each essay. And the way I work is there's a lot of symbolism. When I make a painting, I always put a lot of symbolism in. Lionel is primarily a portraitist, so he is really good with the likeness. So our process was, I would research the subject, not just the essay for our book, but what is the general accepted idea of the person's importance in a general way, and what sort of person were they, and what was their life like, that kind of thing, and look for images. And of course, a lot of these people are pre-photography, and some of them are, and most of them are after photography, but some of the pre-photography ones have been pictured. And so that's really what we did. I went ahead and looked for what is their importance, what are symbols that I could add to the pictures to help round out the face. And also I looked at the garment that the person was wearing or would wear, and made, sometimes I made that into symbolism as well. Like for Madre Conchita, I put her in a blusa of otomi pattern, because she spent the last part of her life ministering to the Otomi people in Mexico. So I tried to find pieces of lives that would make symbolism, that would make the illustrations interesting and tell more of the story than would meet the eye.
You've said elsewhere that there were so many great historical women to choose from that finding good candidates was not a problem. How did each of you determine who would make the cut? And are there any that didn't make the cut that you regret not including?
It was definitely a collaborative process. And I know Kathy and Ellen have perspectives on this as well, is that we definitely had more women than we could write about. That was, finding subject was not a problem. And we had others recommend names to us, which was helpful because we all operate within our own purview. And I think with some of the women, we thought they were really extraordinary, but we also wanted to have good background on them. And so we just couldn't find enough information, say, that didn't require going to archives in Mexico or good research. And I mean, one woman who stands out is Huerta, who is a journalist. She became a teacher. There's this famous photo of her standing in the press room with her arms aside. She's like personally put her body between herself and her presses to keep the Texas Rangers from smashing her equipment. She was absolutely revolutionary, but we just didn't have the right materials at the time to be able to tell her story. So I think Kathy and Ellen might have others that they are thinking of that we'd love to be in another book.
The other thing about Jovita is that we didn't want to pick too many women from similar backgrounds or professions. And so Juana Belen was a publisher of a newspaper that she sold everything she had, even her animals, to buy this newspaper. And so, we were trying to balance, and we wanted to make a good broad cross section and balance of professions and types of stories as well. So we had more information on Juana Belen. And so from the journalism category, Juana Belen rose to the top. From my point of view, I didn't have a long list of women who needed to be included. I just said, we have to talk about the Soldaderas. We have to give a name to these women who came to Texas and the United States and changed the face of the country, who've never been recognized as a group. We have to talk about the Virgen of Guadalupe, and La Malinche was suggested to me, and we all three said, oh, of course, oh my God, yes. And other than that, I really had to depend on Ellen and her long expertise, and Jennifer and her research abilities to uncover the other stories to round this out.
One of the other strong women is Dolores Huerta, and of course, who's alive and well, and at the age of 91 is a revolutionary woman, constantly fighting, and has never forgotten what she needs to do and her struggles to do this, and of course, all of the things that she had to give up. So how we were able to utilize the inclusion of Dolores was by asking her to write the foreword. That, I was so thankful for the fact that she agreed to do it, and we did it over an interview on the phone. But I think that if we do another book, and by that time, there's going to be many women, including Beta Cortinas, who just died. And these are women that are probably need to have their story told, hopefully before they leave us. But we were able to include, I was just thrilled we were able to include Dolores.
That's a nice segue into my final question, which is, A recent review in the Southwestern Historical Quarterly praised your book for, quote, unshackling us from outdated ideas of leadership. When it comes to Texas and Mexican history, what should young girls and women and society more generally take away from your book regarding what leadership looks like?
I think if you look at the stories of this book, one thing that is striking is that not a single woman in this book operated from a place of wealth or power or influence, and still it changed the world around them. So you don't have to have a fancy degree. You don't have to be from a wealthy family. You don't have to have connections. You can do things in your own sphere, in your family, in your neighborhood, in your community, in your church, that radically change the world, that are revolutionary. So don't think that you can't do it, because every last one of you can do it.
I think one of the other things that young women can take away from this is that women who look like them, who represent the types of lives that they have had, the different contexts in which they live, different sexualities, that nothing can hold you back. And I think it gives strength to those of us who have never had those role models. And that's most women. We have not had those vibrant, vivacious, and strong women in our books, in our history classes, etc. And just the mere fact that the gender, we of that gender, possess all of those qualities, and the can-do attitude to do this, and against all kinds of misfortunes, you can be successful. And I think that's an incredible, incredible strength that we have for the young women.
And you know what, Ellen, that's in every single story, isn't it? It's in every single story, from the Zapatistas, you know, all the way up to the front of the book. That's in and all the way through the forward. Dolores talks about how nervous she was when she thought about being an activist and trying to make change. And and she said to her mother, I don't think this is the right thing, because it makes my stomach hurt, and it makes me butterflies, and it makes me, you know, so nervous. And her mother said, well, that's not a sign that you shouldn't do it. That's a sign that you should do it. That's a sign that you're on the right track, and that you are undermining the power and authority that are keeping your people down. And you, of course, you're going to be nervous about that. And of course, it's going to be scary to take the stage and the microphone the first few times, but that's how you absolutely know that you're in the right place. And if I had felt or heard that when I was a lot younger, I think I might have made some different decisions, honestly. I really, really do.
Once again, I would like to thank our guests, Kathy Sosa, Dr. Ellen Riojas Clark, and Dr. Jennifer Speed. Their book, Revolutionary Women in Texas and Mexico, Portraits of Soldaderas, Saints, and Subversives, is available online from Trinity University Press and wherever else you purchase your books.
On behalf of Commissioner George P. Bush and the Texas General Land Office, thank you once again for joining us here. We'll be back next time with more This Week in Texas History.